I didn't hear my name over the engine. I just watched the excavator bucket bite into the wet concrete of my new bridge and chew through 6 months of weekends, while the HOA chair smiled like she'd won something. And in that roar, I knew 2 things at once. This wasn't a misunderstanding. And if Marla Green thought she could bulldoze me into shame, she hadn't met the part of me that doesn't scare easy. I yelled my permit number over the racket, RC 2025 Wolavo-84 inspected, and paid. But the operator kept going neighbors filming from their driveways, and Marla raised a paper over her head like a queen with a decree. The slab cracked, a railing popped like a tooth, and I felt that hot, cold flash of anger and embarrassment fighting in my chest while the person with the title acted like the law was whatever she said it was. I'm Ryan Cole. I live in Cedar Ridge, a tidy loop of 71 houses curled off County Route 19. 2 cul-de-sacs, 1 way in and 1 way out. And my place sits down by Millstone Creek, where I used to skip rocks with my dad, before anyone dreamed an HOA could police the color of a fence. So when he passed, I bought this place like I was keeping a promise to the kid who loved that. Water built a simple concrete span with rebar and railings. I welded in the carport, nothing fancy, just safe and mine. Marla rolled up that morning with an entourage and a yellow machine, like she'd ordered both off a menu announced in her sunglass voice that I was in violation of Section 12.4. 7. Unauthorized structure, encroaching on common vista. And I held up my laminated permit and said calmly, 'cause that's my gear. The bridge sits entirely on parcel B311, which is my land. But she glanced at it. The way you glance at a receipt you don't intend to honor. And told the operator, association jurisdiction applies to external modifications. Visible from common areas proceed, and the bucket dropped like a verdict. You know what I mean. That moment when you realize someone isn't confused, they're counting on you to be. So I shut my mouth because if I spoke, I'd say something I couldn't unsay, but I did notice the folder tucked under her arm. My lot outlined in red pencil, with a margin note, B311A, and a year 2021. Plus glossy photos, she waved at the crowd, showing muddy water around a footing, and in the corner, the tail of a pickup with a GOV CTR decal that did not belong to me. When I asked to read Section 12.4, in full, she called it internal governance, not available to members. I reminded her state law says, members can inspect governing documents, and she pivoted to a line about operational guidelines, not for public consumption, which is a fancy way to say no. So I changed boots and drove straight to the county building with my deed box under one arm, and the part of me that runs on caffeine and stubborn. Under the other, met a records clerk named Sharon Pierce, who frowned, typed again, disappeared to the basement, and came back with a microfilm sleeve. She slid under a lamp like a magic trick, and there, on a 1956 township map, was a thin blue stripe cut across my parcel labeled Critical Access Corridor. Owner maintains perpetual right to improve access infrastructure, which meant plain as sunrise that B311 includes the stretch of County Route 19 that feeds our entire subdivision, and the HOA can't demolish a pebble there without a court order. Something clicked in me the way a puzzle piece clicks when you finally stop forcing it. And that night I walked the neighborhood at 1 a.m., tracing every street with my feet counting routes, like I was cracking a safe, and every cul-de-sac and curve crawled back to the same truth. No back gate, no emergency lane, no secret cut through the lifeline in and out crosses my land. The very next morning, a certified letter told me to remove debris within 48 hours, or the HOA would hire a crew for $12 for bill me also insisting I submit to mandatory HOA arbitration. I had declined in writing at closing, and my wife Jess looked at me over her coffee like maybe we should just pay. And our 8-year-old asked if the men with the machine were coming back, and I told him no, because sometimes a promise is the only thing keeping your spine from folding. I hired an attorney named Eric Lawson, a property guy with a baseball coach voice, and he tapped my permit, tapped my deed, said this is textbook willful destruction. State statute allows treble damages. We file a police report today and seek a restraining order tomorrow. And while we're at it, start 12 folders, dates, copies, screenshots. Who said what and when? Paper wins. Marla didn't wait for court. She posted a victory lap on the Cedar Ridge Facebook page, calling my bridge an unauthorized hazard, removed to protect home values, hinted that my lawsuit could cost every family thousands, and the likes piled up. Because fear is fast, you know what I mean, but then a 73-year-old neighbor named Mrs. Eaton commented that Marla had threatened to fine her every Friday until she signed an easement in 2021. 47 citations in 6 months for grass at 3.1 inches. When the rule said 3 an offense, slat a shade too brown, and she had saved every letter. And right under that, the treasurer Tyler Quinn posted that the board had not been fully informed before the demolition. The secretary Carrie Boyd said she never saw my permit, and the narrative started to wobble. Around the same time, I got an anonymous Proton mail that said simple as a note. On a fridge check property transfers, 2019 to 2024, in Cedar Ridge and adjacent parcels, look for Northbridge. Communities and follow the money. Then delete this. So I did what the email said, and the pattern that showed up felt like a blueprint. Someone tried to hide under the rug. A retired county planner named Helen Park, asked to meet in public, slid a manila envelope across a cafe table with side-by-side copies of old deeds versus current records where whole sentences had been shaved off, plus an original HOA charter from 1986 that explicitly excluded county roads from association control, and a 2019 amended charter that suddenly claimed jurisdiction, and she said softly, but with a steel edge, someone has been altering the record. A county planning inspector named Andre Lopez met us at a diner and laid down an emergency access complaint that was clearly backdated. The letterhead said received August 24th, but the fax machine strip showed September 18th, 3 weeks after my bridge was torn down. And then he produced a contract between Marla and Northbridge Communities, dated June 2024, promising her a 2% commission if she delivered all necessary access rights by year-end, which on a $70+ million plan looks a lot like motivation. And he also had audio where her voice used the phrase decisive solutions about my bridge, like she was picking a tool off a shelf. That's when the texts started from a burner number. Drop the suit, or your kid will be very alone at school. And we called the police because bravery isn't an emotion. It's a choice you make when your stomach rolls. And a week later, Agent Dana Miller from the FBI shook my hand and said, "We take threats seriously. And we also like paper, bring it all." Eric turned his conference room into a war room. We built a timeline with strings like a detective show. Folder A was ownership, the 1956 map. The deed that rolled the Route 19 strip into B311. The purchase file someone's scissors had visited. Folder B was fraud, the forged board resolution authorizing emergency demolition, the backdated complaint, the altered charter. Folder C was motive, the Northbridge Commission Bank transfers the audio clip. Folder D was damages, concrete rebar equipment rentals, $82,900 line by line, and a handwriting expert studied the board signatures and said all three were written by the same hand within minutes of each other, which is a polite way to say forgery. Marla tried one more scare email warning that my lawsuit would bankrupt the HOA and force $4,800 assessments per family. Eric answered that legal fees aren't assessed unless the HOA wins and a court awards them, and if the HOA loses liability, falls on those who exceeded their authority, not on families already paying mortgages. And while that reply didn't rack up likes, like a bonfire, it did slow the panic. Local news showed up after Tyler and Carrie called for transparency. A reporter asked Marla why the HOA believed it could tear down a structure on a county right-of-way attached to private land. And she stormed off camera, and courage is contagious. Because the next morning, Helen agreed to an interview. Andre handed a thumb drive to Agent Miller, and the state attorney general's office was suddenly saying our names. At 5 a.m., the warrants came down. Agents knocked on 6 doors, and when they found Marla, she was at the regional airport with a suitcase full of cash and documents that didn't belong to her, which was not the ending she'd rehearsed. And yeah, that happened. The emergency hearing the next day felt unreal. A neighborhood fight in a room with a seal on the wall. And I sat with Eric, while the prosecutor asked questions without adjectives. Ms. Green, did you report the $86,000 moved through an offshore account, ending in 3119 on your federal return? Yes or no, Ms. Green, who instructed private investigator Camden Ross to photograph the Cole family at their child's school, and the handwriting expert explained pen pressure and stroke order until even the back row could see the truth. And Eric barely needed to talk, he just walked. Judge Margaret Vance threw folder A, the permit, the inspections. The map that said, owner maintains perpetual right to improve access infrastructure. And then he let the silence do the heavy lifting. The judge breathed, spoke in the same tone you'd use to order lunch, found probable cause that Marla engaged in unauthorized destruction of private property, fraudulently represented her authority, and attempted to conceal it with falsified documents, revoked bail, and ordered her removed from the Cedar Ridge Board, effective immediately pending further proceedings. And the clink of the cuffs was the first sound that didn't feel like a threat since the bucket hit concrete. That's where I stopped the celebration, because there wasn't one. I walked outside into a morning that looked like any other and stood by a row of news vans while people talked about property rights, like they'd just discovered the concept. Jess squeezed my hand. Caleb asked for pancakes. And I realized I'm not a hero. I'm a guy who built a bridge, kept receipts, and refused to let a clipboard rewrite the truth. Here's the part that will start the argument the comments are built for. If a homeowners association can't be trusted to tell the truth about what it controls, should it control anything? You can't audit yourself. Or does the community you want require something tighter, looser, or just more honest than a board that can reinvent the rules mid-demolition? Where's the line between protecting a neighborhood and policing it for profit? And how many of us have seen a petty rule become a weapon in the hands of someone who enjoys the swing? Tell me what you think. Who was right? Who was wrong? Where the system failed? And what you've seen where you live? Drop your city, so I know where you're watching from. Hit subscribe. If you believe sunlight beats back room deals, share this with the neighbor who confuses power with permission. And if you've got a story like mine, I'm listening.